Give a man a fish, and he eats for a day. Teach him how to fish, and he eats for a lifetime. But what if he already knows how to fish? Actually, he's been fishing for years. He knows every fish, he knows every rock, every stream, and every season. Maybe what he actually needs is to be able to teach a whole lot of other people how to fish. I want to talk today about the capacity that exists in every poor country among people to get things done, to improve their lives and improve their communities' lives, and the way that the international aid system marginalizes and squashes and sometimes even destroys this capacity. Particularly, I want to talk about this capacity in peace building. Now, the aid system's fallen in love with something called a needs assessment. And this is a great idea. Before we design a program, we go and find out what people need. So we find they need lots of things. They need water, they need health, they need education. That makes us feel powerful because we can give them these things. But what's better is that in giving them these things that they need, we've got jobs for the next 10 years. It would be very different if our starting point was, what are people able to do for themselves, and how can we find a sort of catalytical injection that will release that power? Maybe this sounds a bit fanciful, but let me tell you a remarkable story about the Red Cross in Burundi. So in just 5 years, the Red Cross changed from being an organization based in the capital, delivering projects that were funded by donors, to an organization with nearly 400,000 people, volunteers, covering 98% of the country, helping each other to overcome the challenges of life in a very poor country, and actually funding their volunteering groups with membership fees and businesses like rearing animals. What's even more interesting is that when the World Food Programme wanted to distribute food in Burundi, they didn't go to the UN or the government or a big NGO. They went to this network of volunteers. If Ebola ever came to Burundi, which God forbid, these people would be the first responders. I've actually seen the same thing in a project in Eastern Congo, the Centre Résolution Conflit. One of the things that they do is persuade militia members to come out of the bush and return to civilian life. And here's a picture of the director, Henri, with some of those militia members. They use radio, so they get people who've already come out and disarmed to call up to their companions and say, it's time to stop fighting. People want you back in the community. The Centre will help you to resettle. That works, but what's really interesting is that people in villages have started to listen to these broadcasts. You can see why, because they tell you which commanders are still fighting, which roads are safe, and which rumors are true. But then something else has happened. The act of getting together on a Sunday morning for 2 hours around a single radio set has led people to develop all sorts of really interesting ideas for their communities. Here are some of them. Now, there wasn't someone like me in a white 4x4 coming along and saying, now what you really need is a photography project. These are all ideas that they came up with themselves, and mostly they funded themselves. And now some of those villages are putting together their funds to buy a radio for the village down the road. And there are over 300 villages listening to these radio broadcasts. So that's what I mean by local capacity. When I co-founded Peace Direct, our belief was that wherever there was conflict, we would find local people building peace. We test this belief every day. We map what people are doing on our Insight on Conflict website. We've never failed to find them. Not in Sudan after 20 years of civil war, not in Iraq, not in Afghanistan, not even in the Central African Republic. There are always people there, bringing people together, mediating in conflict, and getting people from opposing sides to actually work together visibly for the common good. If we go back to Burundi, this is what it looks like there. So this is a map that shows you how many peace-building organizations are active in different provinces. And you can see that it's not 1, it's not 5 or 10. In most provinces, there are more than 20 organizations. We did this map because a number of Burundian organizations are very worried about the elections next year. Elections are often a trigger for violence, and you can already see the signs in Burundi. You can see young men disappearing across the border into the Congo for military training, and you can see political parties enrolling children who are definitely too young to vote. So these organizations have come together to create an early warning network, citizen reporters who are trained to spot these signs and shout out when they find them, so that even if it's in some remote rural part of the country, that message will get out. So that's what I mean by local capacity. Now let's talk about ideas. Our introducer talked about the fact that I used to invest in technology startups. We funded scientists and engineers who wanted to challenge the status quo. So I remember one in particular who believed that you could use a large molecule protein to deliver drugs. Nobody else thought that was possible, but he was determined to prove it. The days when we signed contracts to work long-term with these remarkable people, those were really the red letter days for me. And it's exactly the same now. When we start working with a new peace-building organization, I find that so exciting. We've just started working with a group in Myanmar called Panzagar. There's a lot of hate speech in Myanmar, and it's getting more all the time, particularly between religious groups. There isn't a lot of internet in Myanmar, but there soon will be. So what Panzagar are doing is going into the towns before the internet arrives and running workshops about hate speech, about how the internet amplifies it, and about what people can do to challenge hate speech. I think that's a completely brilliant idea. When I was in venture capital, it was very clear. Funders had money, and entrepreneurs had ideas, and the money was applied to the entrepreneurs' ideas. Unfortunately, it doesn't work quite like that in the aid business because donors have ideas. And what typically happens is the donor has an idea, then they contract with an international organization, could be a company even like Pricewaterhouse, to deliver their idea. And at the end of a very long food chain, there's a local organization that actually makes things happen on the ground, but often without having had any say at all in what that project is. I think we all know where this leads to. In our case, it led to a clinic being used as a cowshed in Sudan because nobody had thought about the fact that the clinic was being put in a place where people wouldn't go because of the fault lines of conflict. I heard it said in Nepal by an entrepreneur, £100 for a project that I can use with my discretion is worth £100,000 to me to deliver a donor's program. Let me tell you about another creative idea. Going back to the Congo, there's been a lot of conflict, and the justice system is pretty well out of reach for most people. So what do you do if you've got an argument with your neighbor? Well, you either go to the police or a traditional chief, and that often means the person with the biggest bribe gets the best outcome, or you pick up a machete. Neither of these is really great. So Chiretsi, our partner there, developed or redeveloped the traditional baraza system, where the community elects a committee who convenes a group to hear cases. Here's a picture of one of the barazas, they're just signing the agreement at the end of a case. What they found was that there were lots of things women didn't want to talk about in front of the committee when it consisted of men and women. Things like rape within marriage, things like domestic violence. So they had this really ingenious idea that they would embed within the baraza a women's court run by women, but whatever the women's court decided was the right punishment or restitution, that would be enforced by the main court. So women's ideas, but enforced with the power of men and women working together. I was lucky enough to go and visit one of these courts. I have to say it was a bit like a cross between Oprah and Judge Judy. The case was a young woman who'd had an adulterous relationship and she'd had a baby. And the husband was actually okay about it until the hospital presented him with the bill. And then he said, "Not my baby, not my bill." In the course of this case, I heard someone say, "Well, she's a young woman and you're an old man and probably you couldn't satisfy her." So this was a strange thing to hear in a court of law. But the system works. 90% of cases are resolved within 3 weeks. It costs the litigants nothing, and it costs Focci $50 for each case that's heard. So that's about local capacity, and it's about local ideas. Now I want to talk about something a bit different, which is moral authority. When the director of the Centre Résolution Conflit goes into the bush to find one of those militia leaders, he can be waiting for a week or two in a place where he knows no one and he has no protection until someone comes to talk to him. If he's lucky, it's a good conversation and he manages to get some people out. Here he is with some child soldiers just coming out of the bush. Then the former combatants do some work in the community. They mend roads or they make a market to show that they're sorry. And then the community enrolls them in agricultural cooperatives. Everyone in this situation is taking massive risks. The director is risking his life. He doesn't know what's going to happen in the bush. The commander's risking being turned into the authorities. The soldiers are risking being rejected by the community once they come out of the bush. And the community is risking receiving someone who turns out to be a rapist or a thief. Henri, the director, is able to challenge people to take these risks because he has the moral authority that comes from the risks that he's taken. I want to talk about some really interesting research by a woman called Masuda Bano about how, unfortunately, we can also destroy this valuable local asset. So she looked at 6 organizations in Pakistan that had received external funding. When she went back a year later, every single one of them had imploded. This was a shocking result, really. So she started wondering why that was. She came to the conclusion that successful leaders of voluntary organizations are people who do it for a non-financial motive. This doesn't mean they're all saints, but it means that they're fulfilling some idea or dream that they've got, or maybe there's a religious imperative. But their followers can see that they're not motivated by money. So when the money comes in from outside, the followers think, well, so it was about the money after all. And they peel away. But what's much more interesting is that actually the original founder, the social entrepreneur, is no longer satisfied. Because for that person, money wasn't a motivator, and now money has replaced whatever their original motivation was. So they also tend to give up. I thought that was completely fascinating. So does that mean that we shouldn't support local peace building from outside? No, it doesn't. But it means that how we do it is really important. And I was interested to see that what Masuda concluded from her academic research is very similar to what we've learned through our practice on the ground. It's things like allow organizations to grow at a reasonable rate. Don't think you can somehow pump them up and make them massive overnight. People need salaries, but pay salaries that are proportionate to the local economy. And most important of all, yes, fund people, but fund them to do what they want to do, not to deliver your pet project. So those are the three things that I feel we should recognize and value: local capacity and skills, local ideas, and the moral authority that makes change happen. And here is some change happening in Nepal. So what does this mean in practice? Some of you may go on to work in development. I challenge you to look for the local capacity to meet local needs and only bring in external resources if you're absolutely sure that there isn't enough local capacity. If you're going to work in journalism, maybe reporting on conflict, yeah, report the men with guns, report the tanks rolling over the border, but also report the religious leaders bringing people together and the women doing the same thing. That's not peace journalism. That's telling the whole story. And if you give money to development, then I'd suggest you give it to the organizations that name and celebrate their local partners, that talk about what the Bangladesh Fisherfolk Association has done, not what Global Caring, Inc. has achieved. Because those are the ones that really know how to make change happen. So finally, let's go back to the river. When we get involved in peace building from outside, we need to think of ourselves as stepping into a river that's always been flowing, that will continue to flow after we leave. That river is the local peace building that is going on everywhere at all times. With it, we can achieve a lasting peace. We can unlock the power to get things done. Thank you very much.